Powered by Riverside FM.
Welcome to another edition of Unconventional Playbook. Please hit that like and subscribe button. You know, I've been having a great couple of weeks because the Minnesota Vikings critics are running and hiding and scrambling. You know, at the start of the season, they were saying that the Minnesota Vikings weren't going to be very good, that they were going to have the opportunity for the first pick. And maybe we should look at wide receiver or D-tack in the draft with our first pick. Those critics are running and hiding right now. Like, I didn't think the Minnesota Vikings would be that bad. I definitely didn't think that they would be 12-2 right now, but I didn't think that they would be that bad. But there were a lot of people that were throwing a lot of shade at the Minnesota Vikings when a lot of people in UP Nation, Skull Nation, Purple Nation were reminding people of all of the weapons that the Minnesota Vikings have, a.k.a. Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, T.J. Hockenson, Christian Darrisaw, Harry the Hitman. We had a lot of weapons, and now you don't hear a peep. You don't hear a peep from the critics. Now, the Vikings are who they are. They're 12-2 right now on a 7-game. Can you believe it? After the 2-game losses within the same week, the Detroit Lions and the Rams, we've rattled off 7 straight games, people. We've rattled off 7 straight games, Skull Nation. Now, the question remains, how do we stack up against the best in the league? I think you have to put the Buffalo Bills up there right away. The Buffalo Bills just beat the Detroit Lions, and honestly, without having a couple of mistakes from the Buffalo Bills, that game should have been a blowout. It felt like a blowout. I don't think the Detroit Lions defense did anything to really stop the Buffalo Bills that game. But the heart of a champion, the Lions won the division last year. They got the heart of a champion. They came back, but they are missing some pieces, and the injuries are starting to pile up. But when you look at the comparison between the Minnesota Vikings and the Buffalo Bills, I think taking on the Buffalo Bills will be a daunting task, but I don't think the Bills are insurmountable. I don't think that they are a team that you can't beat, unbeatable, indestructible, whatever adjective you want to heap onto the Buffalo Bills. I don't think that they're that. I think the Minnesota Vikings, if it came to them facing the Buffalo Bills in the Super Bowl, I think it would be a very good game. But it's definitely not a game that I think the Minnesota Vikings, that you could say, would definitely lose that game. I think we have a good chance. I think B-Flow could do some things with his fronts to really confuse their passing game. So I think, honestly, if the Minnesota Vikings had the opportunity to play the Buffalo Bills, I think we have a very good chance to be successful. The Pittsburgh Steelers, I'm not sold on Russell Wilson. He's having a great game. But I think the strength of the Pittsburgh Steelers would be their defense. If the Minnesota Vikings had the opportunity to play the Steelers in the Super Bowl, I'm not necessarily afraid of their offense. You know, they're not a super great running team, although they have the ability to be able to do some things in the running game. Russell Wilson, again, has been playing absolutely great this year compared to what he did with the Denver Broncos. Tomlinson is getting the best out of him. And those Pittsburgh Steelers teams are always going to be prepared. They're always going to be well coached. And they're always going to have that tough physical defense. But are the Pittsburgh Steelers somebody that you're really afraid of? I think having the opportunity to play them, they're not going to put a lot of points on the board. They hang their hats on their defense. Where I think our offense would be able to put up points against the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Pittsburgh Steelers offensively would not be able to keep up with the Minnesota Vikings if we had the opportunity to play them in the Super Bowl. See, this thing is setting up. I hope UP Nation, Minnesota Vikings Nation, that you guys are starting to see what's starting to align. The stars are starting to align for the Minnesota Vikings. When you talk about other teams that are supposedly good, the Baltimore Ravens are a different animal. With Lamar Jackson in the backfield, he's the X factor. I'm not afraid of him beating us through the air. What I am afraid of is going off script. How many times can Lamar Jackson go off script? I think we can game plan for their running game. We can game plan for their passing game. But the one thing that you really can't game plan for is Lamar Jackson. They are the one team that worries me a little bit is because they go off script so often at the quarterback position. You can't really scout for that. You're always going to have some sort of contain, some sort of spy on the defensive end. So now you're legitimately taking one person out of your defense just to be able to spy Lamar Jackson. That's why he causes defenses so many fits. But Lamar Jackson has yet to win the big game in the playoffs. He's similar to Kirk Cousins, a little better than Kirk Cousins because at least he gets to the playoffs. But he's been one and done a lot. That's been his critique, that he hasn't been able to win the big game in the playoffs. The question is, UP Nation, are you afraid of the Baltimore Ravens? I'm not. I'm not afraid of the Baltimore Ravens. This thing is aligning up really good for the Minnesota Vikings, who just clinched a playoff spot. Houston Texans, you afraid of the Houston Texans? You saw what we did to the Houston Texans. Now, I know that they're a good football team, and it's hard to beat a team twice, but I'm not afraid of the Houston Texans. I don't think the Houston Texans and C.J. Stroud want to see any more B-flow in the Minnesota Vikings defense. We handled our business. I don't think the Houston Texans want to see us again. That is another team that people have maybe penciled in to a Super Bowl. Again, if the Minnesota Vikings are fortunate enough to get there, I'm not scared of the Houston Texans either. UP Nation, this could be our year. The stars are aligning, man. The stars are aligning. Nobody's afraid of the Houston Texans. Nobody's afraid of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Nobody's afraid of the Buffalo Bills. Nobody's afraid of the Baltimore Ravens. Now let's get to the nitty-gritty in the AFC. You're talking about the Kansas City Chiefs. 2 times Super Bowl champion. I don't care what the Kansas City Chiefs look like right now. I don't care. I know their offense is looking a little pedestrian. They've won some close games, but every time people try to throw some dirt on the Kansas City Chiefs, they seem to rise to the equation. Supposedly last year, Kelsey was distracted and all of the hoopla, between him and his girlfriend distracted the team. Didn't seem to distract him when it counted. See, I expect when all the smoke clears, it's going to be the Kansas City Chiefs again in the Super Bowl. Just because they got that dude. They got that dude at quarterback. They got that dude and when you have a guy that's iconic like that, at any point in time, he can flip that switch and make things a little bit better. He just finds a way to win. Kansas City concerns me a little bit because they just simply can find a way to win in the most important moments. Just look back at their history. Just look back at their resume. You would be foolish not to be concerned. But I think if the moment arises, I think the Minnesota Vikings would be able to take care of business. My point is, I can't sit here and guarantee that the Minnesota Vikings are going to win. But my point is, the way the Minnesota Vikings are playing right now and who they've become right now, I'm just not afraid of anybody. Concerns? Yeah, you should have some concerns depending on what team that you're looking at. But in terms of being afraid to play, the Minnesota Vikings can stand up against any team in the NFL. Everybody is touting the Philadelphia Eagles. And I've been giving the Philadelphia Eagles the eye test all season long. The Philadelphia Eagles are a solid team. But are you afraid of Jalen Hurts and the crew in terms of being able to pencil them in? To be honest with you, I'm more concerned about Green Bay than I am the Philadelphia Eagles. I think the Philadelphia Eagles are frauds. And you can book that. I think they're frauds. Good football team, but to put them in the upper echelon in terms of penciling them in for the Super Bowl, I'm just going to sit and let that marinate and tell all the Philadelphia Eagles fans and anybody that thinks Philadelphia Eagles should be up there, just wait and see how this turns out for the Philadelphia Eagles this year. I've been giving it the eye test. There's nothing scary there. They can barely get along with each other in the locker room right now. And at the beginning of the season, they didn't even want their head coach there if they want their head coach there now. So I'm not afraid of the Philadelphia Eagles. Washington Commanders, too young. Now, like Lamar Jackson, they've got their stud that can go off script too. He's just not ready for prime time yet. He's not ready for what the NFL playoffs are. And neither is their team. Maybe in another couple years we could take the Washington Commanders seriously. I'm not taking the Washington Commanders seriously right now. Good football team. I know some has mentioned them as a possible Super Bowl contender. I just don't see that. The Detroit Lions are tough, man. They're a tough team, but I think the injuries are piling up. The one thing I know about sports is that when you have multiple injuries to important pieces of your team, no matter what sport you play, it's going to show up at some point in time. And I think for the Detroit Lions, this is the wrong time to be broke up and injured. This is the wrong time. You're going into the playoffs. And I think that's ultimately going to affect them. I don't think the Detroit Lions are going to be anywhere close to being fully healthy for this stretch run and for the playoffs, and I think ultimately they're going to get got. And so if you ask me if the Minnesota Vikings can beat them, absolutely. Absolutely. I think you're going to see it the last game of the season. I think you're going to see it there. Like, I think you're just going to see a different game and a different Minnesota Vikings team. The purpose of this pod is to ask, are you worried? If you're a Minnesota Vikings fan, are you worried about the other upper echelon teams in the NFL? I'm not. Everybody's penciling in these teams that are supposedly Super Bowl caliber teams. Very rarely are you hearing the Vikings being mentioned in that room, but they're starting to get there, and I'm not afraid of anybody. Green Bay Packers. Now, the Green Bay Packers are a pretty good defensive team. They're well coached, got a pretty good quarterback. Some people want to say he's great. This is their third Hall of Fame quarterback that they've had in a row. I'm not ready to put Jordan Love up there yet, but Jordan Love is a really, really good quarterback. I think the Packers are going to be heard from in the playoffs. They concern. Good football team, well coached. Good football team, well coached. But do I see anything scary? Are they unbeatable? No, but definitely cause for concern. There's always been these teams, UP Nation, that when the Minnesota Vikings are pretty good, that there's always this one team that the Minnesota Vikings have to get past to realize their dream of going to the Super Bowl. What I'm trying to point out is that there's not that team this year. There's just not. They're just not that team. Green Bay Packers are a good team, but I wouldn't call them elite. The Detroit Lions are a good team. Their record right now is better than what the actual team is because they're broke up and hurt. Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Baker Mayfield, Baker Mayfield is about 2 interceptions away from being eliminated from the playoffs. Baker Mayfield is one of the most sporadic quarterbacks in the league. He's got a lot of dog in him. He's got a lot of heart. You know, what he's done with Tampa Bay has been really, really good. Got himself out of a bad situation in Cleveland. Got himself out of a bad situation in Carolina. Bounced around to the Rams. Got some coaching. Signed with Tampa Bay. Now they're leading the division and have an opportunity to go to the playoffs. Baker has shown he can win in the playoffs. If you can win in Cleveland, and have them win the playoff game, you got something. Should the Minnesota Vikings be scared of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? Absolutely not. Los Angeles Rams? Well, the Los Angeles Rams beat us, but they beat us on the short week. They beat us on the short week and brought in 2 of their top wide receivers who we didn't know if not they were going to play. That makes a difference. And we were missing Blake Cashman in the middle. I think if we had to see them again in the playoffs another time around, I think the result would be a little bit different. Is there anybody on the list that I've missed that maybe we should be concerned about? Those are the supposedly teams that have a chance to make some noise in the playoffs and possibly go to the Super Bowl. And when I look at that, this is a little bit different. This is really the first time where the Minnesota Vikings have had an opportunity to go to the playoffs, and there's not that one elite team there, or a team where you're like, oh, this is a bad matchup for the Minnesota Vikings. I really don't see that team. And this is why the number 1 seed becomes really important, UP Nation. It becomes really important. We get that number 1 seed, we're home for the duration. We get that bye, and now we get to focus on playoffs and just winning 2 games to get to the Super Bowl at our house, the Vault, U.S. Bank Stadium. It just seems to me that the stars are aligning for the Minnesota Vikings. The offense is starting to hit their stride a little bit. The defense playing consistent. Everything seems to be aligning. You agree with me, UP Nation? If you do, even if you don't, put it in the comments. Let me know your thoughts. It's the Minnesota Vikings versus the best in the NFL. This is one of the first times where I just haven't been afraid of anything out there that the Minnesota Vikings would have to face. Let me know what your thoughts are. Put your thoughts in the comments. Please hit that like and subscribe button. This has been Unconventional Playbook. Latrey, take us home, man.
I don't know who I am. Can I say I'm a man?